December 21st, 1945. Early morning, a cold European winter still clung to the air. General of the Army Dwight D. Eisenhower was preparing for another long day when the phone rang. It was not a battlefield call. The war was already over. Germany had surrendered months earlier. Yet within seconds of lifting the receiver, Eisenhower's face changed. His hands began to shake. His voice failed him. Then the tears came. This was not a man who cried easily. He had carried the weight of the largest war in human history on his shoulders. But this call broke him. The reason traced back not just to that moment, but to 4 simple words spoken a year earlier, words that changed the course of the war and bound 2 very different generals together forever. To understand why this phone call mattered so deeply, we must go back to the winter of 1944, when the war in Europe was far from over, when hope and disaster were separated by hours, and when one man's instincts clashed with the cautious balance of an entire Allied command. If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below. At the centre of it all were 2 generals who could not have been more different in style, personality, and public image, yet were bound by duty and trust. Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of Allied forces in Europe, calm, political, measured, always thinking of coalitions and consequences, and General George S. Patton, Jr., Commander of the U.S. Third Army, aggressive, fast, unpredictable, and obsessed with momentum. By December 1944, many Allied soldiers believed the worst was behind them. Paris had been liberated on August 25, 1944. Brussels followed on September 3rd. The German army was retreating, battered and exhausted. Allied newspapers were already talking about victory timelines. Some believed the war might end by Christmas. But Adolf Hitler was preparing something desperate and dangerous. He was planning a massive counteroffensive through the Ardennes Forest, a region the Allies believed was too rough, too wooded, and too quiet for a large attack. At 5:30 a.m. on December 16, 1944, German artillery exploded across a 75-mile front. Thousands of shells ripped into American positions. Infantry followed, then tanks. The German plan was bold and reckless. Break through the thin American lines, split the Allied forces, capture Antwerp, and force the Western Allies to negotiate. This became known as the Battle of the Bulge, named for the large bulge the German advance created in the Allied front lines. For Eisenhower, the situation was immediately serious. Communication was poor. Units were cut off. Weather grounded Allied aircraft. Snow, fog, and freezing temperatures favoured the Germans. The American 80 Corps was hit hard. Towns like St. Vith and Bastogne became critical points. Bastogne, located in Belgium, was especially important because 7 major roads passed through it. If the Germans captured Bastogne, they could move freely in all directions. By December 18th, Bastogne was surrounded. Inside were elements of the 101st Airborne Division, the 10th Armoured Division, and other units, short on food, ammunition, and medical supplies. Outside, German forces tightened the ring. Eisenhower needed a fast solution. He called for a high-level meeting at Verdun on December 19, 1944. The meeting included senior commanders, General Omar Bradley, General Jacob Devers, Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, and George Patton. The mood in the room was tense. Maps covered the tables. Red arrows showed the German advance. Eisenhower knew he had to act quickly, but carefully. He could not panic. He had to think about the entire front, not just one crisis. Most commanders expected defensive talk, regrouping, slow responses. Patton had been anticipating this moment. While others were still trying to understand the scale of the attack, Patton had already turned his Third Army south, even before being ordered to do so. When Eisenhower asked Patton how long it would take him to attack north and relieve Bastogne, the room expected a cautious answer. Moving an entire army in winter conditions was no small task. Roads were icy. Units were spread out. Supplies were strained. Many thought Patton would say at least a week. Instead, Patton answered calmly and confidently. "Let me attack north." 4 words, simple, direct, no hesitation, no explanation. Let me attack north. Those 4 words cut through the room like a blade. Eisenhower paused. He asked Patton again, pressing him on details. Patton explained that his army was already turning, that he could attack within 48 hours. Eisenhower looked at the maps again. He knew the risk. If Patton failed, it could leave other sectors exposed. But he also knew time was everything. Bastogne could not hold forever. Eisenhower approved the plan. That decision, driven by Patton's confidence and preparation, would become one of the most important moments of the war in Europe. On December 22, 1944, German forces sent a surrender demand to Bastogne. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, acting commander of the 101st Airborne, famously replied with one word: nuts. But bravado could not stop tanks. Supplies were nearly gone. Wounded men lay in freezing conditions. Relief had to come soon. Patton's Third Army attacked on December 22nd, as promised. Snow fell heavily. Visibility was poor. German resistance was fierce. Patton pushed his divisions forward regardless. He demanded speed. He demanded pressure. He demanded momentum. Units like the 4th Armoured Division fought through villages, forests, and roadblocks. Losses were heavy. Progress was slow but steady. On December 26, 1944, at around 4:50 p.m., tanks of the 4th Armoured Division broke through to Bastogne. The siege was lifted. It was not the end of the battle, but it was a turning point. The German advance had lost its chance. The initiative shifted back to the Allies. Eisenhower never forgot that moment. He never forgot those 4 words. Let me attack north. They were not just words. They represented preparation, instinct, and trust. Patton had not waited for permission to think. He had anticipated the crisis. He had planned for it. And when the moment came, he delivered. The Battle of the Bulge continued into January 1945, but Germany never recovered. By January 25th, the Bulge was eliminated. The German army had suffered catastrophic losses in men, tanks, and fuel. The Western Allies resumed their advance into Germany. The end was inevitable. Yet the relationship between Eisenhower and Patton was never simple. Patton was brilliant, but controversial. His temper, his language, and his incidents, including the slapping of soldiers in Sicily in 1943, had nearly ended his career. Eisenhower had defended him then, believing his value on the battlefield outweighed his flaws. That decision, too, would prove critical. In March 1945, Patton's Third Army crossed the Rhine River. In April, they advanced deep into Germany, liberating towns and uncovering concentration camps. Patton was deeply affected by what he saw, though his reactions were complicated and sometimes misunderstood. The war ended in Europe on May 7, 1945. Germany surrendered unconditionally. Eisenhower was celebrated as the architect of victory. Patton was widely praised by soldiers, but increasingly criticized by political leaders for his comments about post-war Germany and the Soviet Union. Tensions rose. Patton was relieved of Third Army command and given a less influential role as military governor of Bavaria. Then came December 9, 1945. Patton was on a pheasant hunting trip near Mannheim, Germany. His car, a Cadillac sedan, collided with a U.S. Army truck at a railway crossing. Others in the car were bruised. Patton was badly injured. He suffered a broken neck and spinal damage. He was taken to the 130th Station Hospital in Heidelberg. For nearly 2 weeks, Patton lay paralyzed. He was fully conscious. He understood his condition. He spoke to his wife, Beatrice. He spoke to doctors. He joked at times, but those close to him knew he understood the seriousness. Eisenhower was informed immediately. He followed Patton's condition closely. On December 20, 1945, Patton developed pulmonary edema, his lungs filled with fluid. Despite treatment, his condition worsened. At 5:45 p.m., General George S. Patton Jr. was pronounced dead. He was 60 years old. That is when the phone rang. The call to Eisenhower came shortly after. When he heard the news, he was devastated. Witnesses later said Eisenhower broke down completely. He wept openly. For a man known for his emotional control, this was extraordinary. He later wrote that Patton was one of the most brilliant soldiers the United States had ever produced. He understood Patton's flaws better than anyone, but he also understood his value. Eisenhower knew something else, something few others did. He knew how close the war had come to disaster in December 1944. He knew how those 4 words, spoken calmly in a tense room, had helped save Bastogne, blunt the German offensive, and preserve Allied momentum. He knew that Patton's instincts, preparation, and refusal to hesitate had changed everything. Patton was buried on December 24, 1945, at the Luxembourg American Cemetery, at his own request, among his soldiers. Snow covered the ground. Simple crosses stretched across the fields. Eisenhower later visited the grave privately. No speeches, no cameras, just silence and memory. The phone call that made Eisenhower cry was not just about death. It was about gratitude. It was about unfinished conversations. It was about the weight of command and the cost of brilliance. It was about a moment when history turned on preparation and courage, summed up in 4 simple words. Let me attack north. Those words were not loud. They were not dramatic. They were not shouted. They were effective. And in war, effectiveness is everything. Even today, military historians study that moment. They study how Patton anticipated the German attack. They study how Eisenhower balanced risk and trust. They study how leadership works under pressure. The lesson is not about personality. It is about readiness. It is about thinking ahead. It is about knowing when to act. Eisenhower went on to become the 34th President of the United States. He carried those memories with him. He understood the cost of war better than most. And somewhere in that understanding was the echo of a phone call, a winter evening, and the loss of a man who had once looked at a map and said 4 words that changed everything. History often turns on quiet moments, a decision, a sentence, a phone call. This was one of those moments. If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.